to the Nasscom podcast on AI Speak with Matthias Zwingli, CEO and founder, Connect AI, a company that provides AI solutions for businesses of any size and industry. Matthias has over a decade of experience in the field of innovation and technology, startups, and business development. He also wears many other hats as a startup coach, active angel investor, a podcast host, and today, interestingly, he is on the other side of the podcast. So, Matthias, welcome to this NASCOM podcast, and we look forward to an engaging conversation over the next few minutes with you. I'm going to start. There's so much conversation around AI, generative AI. I think every day you can just see a new report, a new article, a new model being launched. And I think it's important we kind of declutter this space in some ways. And I think that's really the objective of the podcast that NASCOM has initiated. And I think, when I was looking through your website, you really talked about how AI doesn't replace companies. Companies that use AI will replace those that don't. And I think the same is said for individuals. But I wanted to understand a bit about your journey into AI. What's inspired you to start your own AI company? And, what's been it like, right? And especially because we want to take this message out to a lot of other startups that are very, very actively looking at building out their own AI journey.
All right, so I try to put it together. I think for me, I had a couple of moments. I was always inspired. I come more from a business side, which I sometimes regret a bit. I think computer science would have been a good choice to study as well. But I was always looking for adapting on it. And basically, I think the big change, so I always looked at AI from a very business perspective. Then you just scratch the surface, you understand it's important and it's a trend. But then I did like 3 months of Python programming, like a bootcamp with Bagan, and this really helped me to understand Python in the end. So I learned two things. I can do it, but there's people that are so much faster, younger, and better than me. That was a bit the challenge, but it was a good learning. And during that time, Gen AI really took off, and I think this changed a lot of things in the ecosystem and the paradigm as well, because before machine learning and AI, it was very accurate, more or less, right? So it was you put this in and this answer comes out. Now with generative AI, it gets more generative. Model generates, so it's less predictable. And I think for that, it's super exciting, especially in the verge of people, in the mix of people like me and like many others that not strictly come from a computer science background, because you mix a lot of skills together. Of course, you have a technical aspect you need to understand, but it's still early. I think it's like there's not that many experts yet, so it's an amazing time for people to dive into, and you learn it fast. If you do that for half a year, you're probably one of the leading experts, not leading experts, but you're definitely an expert in the field you focused on.
Interesting to see your website, especially because you talked about building for any company, any size. And I think, when we see an India context and somewhere even generative AI, the only guys making money or investing are the really big guys, right? Or big tech in many ways. And the most impact can possibly be in the smaller companies, right? And how do you see them changing? And, what would be, at least how are you advising them on their generative AI or AI strategy? Or can we be happy the way we are? It's not really coming to me at this moment.
Yeah, it was a great point. So I see it the same. I think the biggest impact we see, so what really changed is you don't need a team of 5 data scientists or engineers to build a product anymore. You can do it with a small team and a relatively small budget. So I think it's like a tenth of what it used to cost, and you have very fast results. And I think for that, AI and Gen AI especially opened up a lot of doors for new possibilities in AI projects. So SMEs would definitely profit the most from it in my eyes. However, it's sometimes hard to get to them. So that's what we learned a bit as well. And good that you mentioned it. I think from a coach perspective, I would tell the startup you're too broad and you should go into the niche. we're still a bit in this process ourselves too. So I think it's a bit in a exploration phase at the moment. What we see works good is we build a lot of solutions in the customer support space for telcos specifically. So there we're quite in the niche. But the idea was a bit, and it came from this hypothesis that SMEs would really profit from it. There, which is not, it's sometimes hard to sell it because and that's a bit the readiness of your customer. Is your customer ready for an AI solution? And there we see it, we're still early in the market. What we see happens a lot right now is companies see AI as a interesting or as an important trend. But first step then is to integrate Microsoft Copilot or a GPT enterprise solution. And where we come in, when we really build in a Gen AI model in a task on their business side, this is still a bit early.
Yeah, I think that seems to me the sentiment, that I think the excitement, the interest, the conversations are very high, but enterprise adoption still or continues to be slower. I think most people expect that over the next 6-12 months, this will pick up, and it has to pick up. I don't think that's a choice. But yeah, it is still going slowly. I'm going to shift gears a little, Matthias, and get to the technology side of it. And you've written a LinkedIn post about the whole launch of ChatGPT for Omni and what that provides. And then there was the Google launches that happened, and there's so many others. Llama 3 happened, and there's just a lot happening. So as somebody who is not necessarily a technologist but as advisor or a strategist on technology, how do you advise people or think through what is the right model for my organization, right? Because most conversations say, yeah, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take Copilot? Do you want me to build on an open source? And because there's just so much choice out there, it just makes it very, very hard to say, how do you even get started? And I think sometimes you just lag because of that.
Yeah, we see the same, right? So it's what I see people discuss for months or weeks over what model to choose instead of starting. And my advice is maybe just start. And to start with the easiest solution you can build. So to take out a bit the complexity, go for a problem or like go for a task that has none. Like I see it mostly, it's in the cubus, what you should focus on. Technical feasibility, how easy it is to build, business value, and data privacy. I think these are the three factors that decide if the tasks you want to build has potential and is easy and fast to build, or is a bit more advanced. And if you just get started with Gen AI, I think it makes most sense because it's generative. You will learn a lot on the go. So my advice is really to just get started, and for that, yeah, choose the easiest solution. Normally, what we see, like we can always make it more complex and complicated and more difficult in the future, but choose an easy task to solve. And then my advice is go with a dominant model. We still have best performances on OpenAI models. This will, and I think this is a bit the technology, right? This will be that you see it already happening. They get in similar performance levels. But there you can always, how do you say that? I think first you need to test it, and probably test it with the most dominant one, because then you have a good base score and baseline what it can do. And then you can always optimize it on the problem. So if you go more for cost, then you can see if there's a cheaper open source alternative. And if privacy is important, other open source alternative or an on-prem solution. But I think it's start, get your learnings, and from your learnings, then try to optimize on models based on what's relevant for you.
So what's your personal favorite?
So far, we swapped almost everything to GPT for Omni. I think it makes sense. So it was a bit the issues I had. It's crazy, right? We built support assistants on the GPT-4, and if you look at the model, it's like a Ferrari, and you try to go shopping with it. It kind of doesn't make sense. But the performance is there, and I think we always try to build on forefront technology. The only issues we had was latency. Sometimes it was not fast enough for human interaction, especially if it comes to chat. Voice is then even advanced. So Omni really solved that problem. And another issue we slowly had was cost. It got a bit too expensive building on GPT-4, so it helps.
That's a good lead into my next question, because you're seeing this whole growth of so many AI startups, right? India, I think last year when we tracked, India had about 60, 70 generative AI startups. Today it's 3x of that, and I think there are a lot more out there. So how are you, as a startup coach particularly, what are you seeing in the AI startup world? What are, I mean, there are enormous opportunities, but how would your advice be to them to say, how do you navigate this cost return equation? How do you get to market? What use cases to build for? And don't just get caught in the hype curve, but figure out what you're really doing.
That's a very good question. I think it's fascinating to look at it from an investor and founder perspective. So from an investor perspective, and I think that's almost the easier to start with, to understand a bit the cost of the industry and where the money is going and where they see the expectations. So I think if you look from an investor perspective, you have the hardware or infrastructure layer. And I think there you go from NVIDIA chips or Grok for inference chips. So I think there it's probably the safest. If you want to go in a very broad multi-model LLM infrastructure like frontier model, you need a lot of capital. And if you can't provide that, I think that's not the market for you, because you will compete against OpenAI, Google, and Tesla and so on, and they just have different cash pockets. And what you normally see as well, and that's quite fascinating, OpenAI mentioned it, as soon as you release a new model, the old model is probably pretty useless, at least from a financial perspective. So what they said is they don't get a lot of returns on the GPT-4, GPT 3.5 Turbo or something. So that's a bit the challenge. So last layer that stays is applications. And I think this is the big bet. Some Swiss Andreas Gulli put it very good. So these S curves. We haven't seen a lot of these massive industries yet where we see incredible potential. I think one bet is there on, for example, industries like the health industry, where it would match very good together. You have lots of data, the status quo is not that great. What could we do? What could generative AI do? So I think that's a bit the bet. As a startup, there's many ways to do it. What I love about building Gen AI companies, they're very efficient. So it's you don't need 10, 100. You need a couple of very good employees, but with that you can get very far. And the rest you can really just plug into the scaling opportunities that the technology delivers, right? You have the cloud and the AI tokens basically to scale it infinitely.
So you don't see generative AI as a winner-take-all world, right? Because there is that whole thing about a lot of the money going to the big tech, and then of course there is value at the middle. But I think your point is really saying that there is enough value in the middle, and how do you monetize that value is how you should build it out, right? So don't just get obsessed with what's happening with the billions and trillions of dollars that the big tech are spending, but really focus on what is it that you can solve and what are the best resources you can find to solve that, right?
Yeah, choose your market a bit. I think if you want to compete on the frontier LLM infrastructure models, I think there it's not a winner take all, but it's gonna be it's gonna be a couple of players that run it. I don't think there is too much room for, you don't need 100 models. You need 2 or 3 good ones, and that's what you mostly base it on.
What we're seeing in India is a little bit of Indic language models, because we are a very diverse country with a lot of languages. So you're seeing a few companies that are building out local language models, and I think that'll be an interesting space to watch. It may not be as big as what some of the big tech may be doing, but it's an interesting area. So
totally. Totally. Choose your niche. I wouldn't go for the massive, broad, everything market that the big ones already do, but that's an interesting niche, right? And then, so country-wise, many languages, difficult. So I think USA, it's not the first priority to capture the Indian market. And if you're there already strong, perfect. Then you have other industry niches and sectors, right? Like law is quite country specific. So you can play quite a lot with it. The other day I heard of a company I thought was quite interesting in the US. They basically, so if you build on a OpenAI GPT-4o model, like your intelligence layer is basically the same, right? You can't really differentiate with it anymore. So you really have to think, what's my differentiation? And there I read about a company that do the government contracts. So they focused on that. And that I think is quite a smart focus because it's very niche. You use AI and there's not a lot of people then that easily can copy it because it's such a niche sector where you combine your specific knowledge in this sector with AI. And that can really help. So I think that's the application layer I see functioning.
I think so. We've covered, models. We've covered technology or the, compute needs. What about data, right? Because I think that's again, AI is what the data we feed in, right? And if you are a startup or a smaller company, you may not have access to all that data. So what would you advise from a data lens, right? So is it about synthetic data generation? Is it about other data sources that they should be focused on? So how do you solve the data conundrum, right?
Depends a bit on the area you're in. If you're more in model training, you should solve it somehow. But what we see there a bit is even open source model. I'm curious on this year, right? With the release of Llama 3, which is like a very competitive model, how good open source models will get. So I think that will improve quite a lot. And then what we see there as well is you don't need massive amounts of data mostly. It's better to have high quality, especially later on if you go into the fine tuning or the RAG libraries for the models. We don't train a lot of models. We see it not yet that useful for most of the use cases, especially if you go for SMEs. You get a very good result if you do a very specific RAG, retrieval augmentation generation library, specific on the task. And then you just perform and increase that one. You get quite a good performance already there. And then you can always see, does it need a lot of training? Does it need it? I think most of the applications, they don't have fine-tuned LLMs. They basically just go with what's on the market. And then in terms of data, it depends, right? But I think if you want to go very niche, data is probably key. Find specific data sets. It don't have to be like huge, but this can already be a game changer.
The reverse question to the AI talent shortage is really the fear of workforce and what happens if AI becomes so prevalent and productivity improvements of 30-40% come real. So that whole thing about, will AI take away my job, even if it augments the jobs? And I think just to build on the customer service example, Matthias, that you were saying, right? And India does a lot of work in the customer service area. So, obviously AI will get implemented, and we are very clear that we should be the ones to help implement it for our global customers. But how do you think through what does it do to jobs?
So this question, it's a tough one. So I think a couple of metaphors. So what I thought was interesting is I read this about radiology. So 10 years ago, one of very famous convolutional network scientists, so AI image recognition, he said, in 5 years, there won't be any need or any radiology personnel or experts. We still have them. What we've seen is AI got same level as a human in deciphering tumors or malignant diseases, basically on the X-rays, but they haven't replaced the human in the whole job. And I see it very similarly. It's mostly they it's still a bit stupid. Even Gen AI is very hype, but it's still a bit stupid. It's very narrow. So if you look at customer support, what works very good for us, we reduced so chatting, like everything that is written, that we can give very fast first knowledge base. What does that mean in the end? We reduce ticket volume by 15% for now, 15-20%, but it's not that we replace people. And I think it will be similar to e-commerce, more or less. It's not one or the other. There will be a shift. And I think AI is here. AI will stay. So it will empower a lot of the tasks, and it will automate a lot of the tasks. So I think Klarna, the Swedish buy now, pay later, was quite interesting when they released their solution. Basically same build, but they had 2.2 million conversation in the first month. I think the claim was quite IPO inflated, so it's a bit. I don't see that level right now, but there will be a shift, right? And it's a big question. So it's always hard to say because we don't really know yet. But if you look back at search or Google or the internet, so many jobs came out. We had no clue that like my dad, he has no clue what the search had for the SEO optimization. Who is that? He does not even understand. So I think there's a lot of possibility that new jobs will come out. It's definitely a productivity game. I see a lot of potential right now in optimizing tasks that are repetitive. I think for that it's fascinating, but we're not at the AGI level yet, where you put in a Gen AI model and it solves all your problems.
I'll come back to the AGI question in the end, but I think that's a similar view we really hold, Matthias, which is that AI will automate tasks or change tasks and not necessarily jobs. I mean, I think it'll become your assistant or whatever else that may be there to help you as an individual do what you were doing better. Yes, jobs will get reshaped as they've been reshaped over the years, right? I mean, every technology revolution, it has happened. Yes, this one is much faster, and hence the anxiety levels are higher. And I think we have to prepare for it. And I think the whole focus, at least as Nasscom we're driving, is it's important to start skilling yourself, right? Learn to work with these tools, because you cannot say that it's not going to happen to me, right? So the more efficient you are in using these tools, the more likely you are to be successful in whatever that new job role would be. I know we're going to run out of time, but I had a couple of last questions, Matthias. One was really around, given the work you've been doing, how do you see startups and corporates working together, right? I mean, I know we've had a lot of good examples in India around that, but I think there's still not a huge comfort factor, right? I mean, the process is slow, and somewhere the startup loses patience or something doesn't always work out. So you have good examples, but you don't have a lot of those examples. So how are you seeing that whole startup corporate relationships?
So first of all, very nicely put. I couldn't have said it better. I think it's exactly how I see it as well. From a job perspective, and I'm always quite optimistic. You can always have two ways, but very optimistic. I think life is more beautiful if you're more optimistic.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then to the question to startups and corporates. Yes. It's a bit a challenge sometimes, and I see why. So we try to match during my time Digital Switzerland. We try to do a lot of corporate startup matchmakings, and a couple of learnings out of it. So what we realized, if you're very early on, it's maybe too early, because if you work with a corporate, like just the sales cycles take a lot of time. There's a lot, especially if it gets a bit more technical or data sensitive. You're through the first loop, and then there's now compliance and procurement and so on, and it just takes massive time. And you have to be very crucial. Is that the right job to spend your time at, or can you actually finance it? because it's a long process, can take years, maybe not like months, right? So 6 to 12, 18 months, it's like the norm. And you have to be able to finance that because no one pays you this time. So that's the challenge of it. How can you scale it? I think they work a lot in, it's what we've seen as well. In the beginning, we came in and said, hey, we can solve your AI problems. And now we come in and say, we built this and this and this for this and this customers. It works. You need it. And then it's a lot easier. It's a lot of trust, right? Yeah, it's a, I still struggle. I'm not an expert on that, but like I still struggle on it. It's a tough one, and it's a lot of investment. I think it will be more interesting now because you have an area where there's not that much other solutions. Nevertheless, what we see, they just go to most of the SMEs we talk to, and this is kind of crazy. So many are on Microsoft. So their first step is they try out Microsoft's Copilot with Medium, and then they're a bit disappointed because it's not the holy grail of AI that solves all your issues. But yeah, I think just push it. Be very upfront. I mean, you're an expert as a Gen AI startup. You're an expert in the field. Corporation normally isn't. So don't undersell you. That's you. That's what you know. That's what you can do. And work with, if you already have first cases, work with them, because that's a lot easier. That builds trust in the end as well.
I think that's a related question, Matthias, is around the whole risks of AI, right? I think while there's never been a technology that has created so much excitement, I think there's not a technology, but there's already so much concern around, what it can do, what you need to prevent it. And we've seen use cases coming up which are, harms or, copyright issues and other concerns that are very, very genuine, right? And of course, Europe has implemented or announced the EU AI Act. Other countries are really figuring out what needs to be done from a regulatory perspective. If I'm a startup or a smaller company or an enterprise, and especially for a younger company, right? It's just how should they navigate this regulatory risk frameworks that sound very complex, right?
It totally is. So for me, on a regulatory side, I think if I look at it, of course there are risks, but it's a bit why do the big tech company push for it? And what we see is, especially on frontier large language models, they're not as protected as we first thought. So we see similar performance on closed models and slowly coming up on open source models. So I think the logical way then is reduce the open source space. So how can you protect your models? I think that is one of the main reasons we push that highly or fast for regulations, because technically speaking, it's such a fast moving market. And how do you regulate that? You will be always too slow, and you sometimes don't understand what is happening and what is not happening. And a lot of the things there was concerns about, like, planning a robbery. Like, you can already do that. You can do that with Google. You can do that, and the AI models don't perform that great on it. So I think this early risk we had in the beginning was bioweapons, then robberies, and so on. They don't talk about that anymore. So it's a bit, it came down, but yeah, it's still there. I think I wouldn't regulate, or I try to minimize regulations. As a startup, it's hard because like as a big companies, you can have enough lawyers to solve these issues. But as a startup, it's very tricky. Like, if you have to oblige to all the regulations that come to place, it's going to be very tough. So I hope we're not pushing too hard on regulations. And if they are, try to build easy products, I guess. So the more complicated your product gets, the more data sensitive it becomes, the higher it will be regulated.
Yeah, I think that's where we are. I know we're almost out of time, Matthias, but just last question, right? Where do you think AGI is headed? Do you see that on the horizon? Is it, will we see these super intelligent agents, and humans will be like the secondary guys, right? So
Yeah, you have both saying. You have Elon Musk, what is it, 2 years, and then you have more the other view that is 10 years plus. It could be another how do you say that, overestimation on autonomous vehicle, self-driving cabs moment. From my experience, and that's just my personal view, I think it's 10 years. It's rather 10 years than 2 years. I don't see that level yet. We're still very narrow. It's still kind of stupid, and you still build very task orientated. I mean, it's impressive and in how fast it got to human levels in certain tasks, but combining it, there we're still struggling. And I think there it depends a bit. I think the big question on this topic is, how do you define AGI? Is it a sentient AI technology that rules them all, like more like Skynet, or is it a smart senior manager advisor that can solve multiple tasks? I think it's a bit the question on what level, and depending on what level you choose, the time horizon looks very different. So I think we get better in multitask, multi-model. I think that definitely will come, but I don't see it. Yeah, the sentient AI that solves them all. Hopefully, like, I don't know. That's a bit out of the picture for me yet.
And I think as Nasscom, what we're really saying is focus on adoption, right? I mean, there's so much talk, but we really need adoption at scale. And I think, that is when you really realize whether it works, doesn't work, what's the productivity advantage, what happens to jobs. But otherwise, it's all theoretical, right? So we really, I think unless and until we put all focus at adoption, we're going to just keep talking about all of this, right? So
I do agree, right? I mean, the ideology or the idea of AGI and Skynet, it was around forever. Now I think it's a bit sad that now we have this amazing technology. Rather to test it and see what we can do with it, we then talk about the next being that is 10, 20, I don't know how many years up in the future. So I totally agree. I think it should be about adoption. How can we use it? And with technology, it's a bit like with plants, right? It can be good and bad. We kind of rate it to that, but it's out there. You don't get it away. So I think my approach is, let's move let's lead a sustainable future or a sustainable way, and that is not done by prohibiting it, because I don't think it's not going away. It will stay. So let's move forward and see how we can use it for the good, how we can limit the threats
and do you
and the
see,
dangers.
So I just want to pick up the sustainable future point. And do you see AI and all the ESG footprint that AI is creating as a possible deterrent to some of the net zero goals, or do you see we can use AI more effectively to meet those goals, or a bit of both?
A bit of both. I think definitely it's massive amounts of data and written text. So yeah, I can definitely make it more efficient. It's an interesting field. So I wouldn't like I didn't focus too much on the adoption in green tech yet, but I think, like, if you look at sustainability and ESG, I think there it can definitely help, because it's just a proficiency tool that helps you summarize, find clusters, and so on and so on. And it's such a massive value chain. So to automate this process definitely helps to spot irregularities. And I think we've seen that a bit with the latest trends in around South Pole and early stage. Not so, yeah, it didn't promise what it should. And I think if you get the whole, like, this from selling, like from creating to monitoring to analyzing, if you can make that faster, more autonomous, there's definitely a lot of potential. Let's see. I mean, there, there we had another technology that almost matched better blockchain, but it's still not that much happening. So yeah, I don't know. So this one is a bit open to me. I think it's potential. And I think what I love about Gen AI at the moment is you just deliver value on your first day in action, more or less. So we see it in the first month. We reduce the tickets and we create value and reduce costs. So I have hardly seen that with any other technology hype that fast.
I don't think any other technology has scaled or caught the imagination of so many people, right, across the world. So thank you so much, Matthias, for your time. I hope this was helpful for you. It was very, very informative for us, and we really look forward to engaging with you, hopefully outside this podcast also.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.